Daniel Carter was deep into a high-stakes investigation when a plain envelope arrived. No return address, just 6 chilling words. Stop digging, or your peace ends. Before he could react, his retired canine partner Rex let out a guttural growl and bolted into the storm. What Daniel found next would shatter his world. His mother, tied and trembling inside her own home, a target in a game far more dangerous than he imagined. The criminals thought they could silence him with fear, but they didn't count on a dog's loyalty or a son's love. What happened next will move you to tears and renew your faith in divine protection. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story of loyalty and miracles can reach. The city of Denver, Colorado, wore a restless coat of midnight rain. Wind rattled the empty streets, and the glow of amber street lamps blurred in the slick reflections pooling on the pavement. The police precinct, a square brick building darkened by years of weather and work, hummed faintly with the sound of fluorescent lights and the distant patter of rain against glass. It was late, well past the hour most officers had gone home. Only a handful of desks still burned with the dim light of task lamps, their owners long gone, leaving behind paperwork and the stale scent of coffee. Detective Daniel Carter leaned over his desk, shoulders slightly hunched, fatigue etched into the lines around his gray eyes. At 38, Daniel carried himself with the quiet steadiness of a man who had been shaped by hardship and tempered by discipline. His frame was lean but strong, dressed in a dark navy shirt rolled at the sleeves, his badge clipped neatly to his belt. His short brown hair, dusted with faint streaks of gray at the temples, glistened under the desk lamp's glow. Daniel was known at the precinct for his integrity, an officer who could not be bought, a man who listened before he spoke, and one who carried the invisible weight of every victim he had ever sworn to protect. Years earlier, he had lost his father suddenly to illness, leaving his mother, Margaret Carter, to raise him alone. That loss had forged in him a fierce loyalty to his mother and a distrust of anything false or fleeting. This night, though, his focus was on a sprawling case file spread across his desk. Photographs, transcripts, and coded reports formed a map of connections tied to an illegal weapons smuggling ring. The evidence was growing, and Daniel knew he was closer than ever to pulling back the curtain on a network of dangerous men. His pencil tapped steadily on the paper, but his thoughts were taut, as if the room itself was holding its breath. From the corner of the office, a low growl rumbled. Daniel turned his head slightly and saw his partner, Rex, lying stretched across the rug near the door. Rex was a German shepherd, 9 years old, with a sable coat streaked with silver and a single bent ear that gave him a weathered, almost battle-hardened appearance. His right hind leg bore the faint white scars of an injury sustained years earlier in the line of duty, yet his eyes, deep brown and alert, still gleamed with the sharpness of a guardian. Rex had been Daniel's canine partner since his early days in the unit. More than a partner, the dog was family. Trained with precision, loyal beyond doubt, Rex's instincts often seemed to surpass human reason. Though he was aging, his presence alone radiated both comfort and vigilance, a reminder that some forms of courage did not need words. Daniel rubbed his eyes, pushing the folder away, when he noticed it. A plain envelope sat atop the file he had left closed only minutes ago. It hadn't been there before. No return address, no seal of officiality, just his name, Detective Carter, scrawled in sharp, uneven handwriting across the front. The paper was damp at the edges, as though it had been slipped inside with wet fingers. His stomach tightened. He tore the envelope open carefully and unfolded the single sheet inside. The message was short, printed in block letters that pressed hard into the paper. Stop your investigation if you value your mother's peace. She won't be safe otherwise. Daniel's chest constricted, a cold weight pressing in against his ribs. He read it again, then a third time, though the words remained unchanged. His pulse thudded in his ears. The case had clearly cut too close to the core. They knew about Margaret. They knew she lived alone in a quiet suburb outside the city. 1,000 thoughts collided inside him. Anger, fear, disbelief. but the dominant note was dread. For his mother, for the woman who had given him everything, who had worked 3 jobs when his father died, who had never once asked for anything in return. Margaret Carter was 65, with hair as white as snowfall and eyes that no longer saw with the sharpness they once had. She was gentle, a retired schoolteacher who still baked pies for the neighborhood children on weekends. And now, she was a target. Before Daniel could gather his thoughts, Rex's low growl deepened into a sharp bark. The dog had risen to his feet, muscles rigid, ears angled toward the door. His claws clicked against the tile as he moved, circling back toward Daniel, nudging his arm with insistence. Daniel stared at the letter once more, his hand tightening around it. He didn't need Rex's instincts to confirm what his gut already screamed. This was not a threat to be ignored. He had to act. Now. Rex barked again, louder, then pressed himself toward the office door, his body tense like a drawn bowstring. His head jerked once toward Daniel as if to say, "We don't have time, let's go." Daniel stood abruptly, chair scraping back across the floor. He swept the case file into a folder and shoved it into his drawer. Sliding the letter into his jacket pocket, he grabbed his coat from the rack. The precinct was silent, the storm outside louder than the few officers still in the building. "Come on, partner," Daniel muttered, his voice cracked with urgency. Rex bounded ahead, nails clicking in rhythm against the hallway tiles. Together, they pushed through the heavy glass doors into the storm. Rain pelted Daniel's face, drenching him in seconds. The air was sharp with the smell of wet asphalt and the faint metallic tang of danger. He had planned to sleep at his apartment tonight. Instead, he sprinted across the lot toward his patrol car, Rex leaping into the passenger seat with practiced ease. Daniel's hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. For a brief moment, he glanced at Rex. The dog's eyes were fixed on the dark horizon, unblinking, ears stiff. It was as though Rex knew where they needed to go, knew that Margaret's life might already be hanging by a thread. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel, breath steadying despite the storm that roared inside him. "Hold on, Mom," he whispered. "We're coming." With that, he hit the siren. The cruiser's red and blue lights slashed through the darkness as Daniel sped out of the city toward the small house where his mother lived alone. And Rex, the silent sentinel, sat poised beside him, growl fading into readiness, the loyal heartbeat of the night. Rain hammered the windshield with relentless fury, each droplet slashing sideways as if the night itself were trying to pull Daniel off course. The wipers danced furiously across the glass, but vision remained blurred, distorted by darkness and storm. Denver faded behind them as Daniel Carter gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white, eyes focused ahead though his thoughts spun inward. Rex paced in the back seat, his heavy paws thudding softly against the worn leather. The German shepherd let out a guttural growl that grew into a sharp bark every time the cruiser swerved toward the familiar stretch of road that would eventually lead them out of the city and into the quiet residential neighborhood where Margaret Carter lived alone. Daniel's jaw clenched as he sped through the deserted streets, headlights carving narrow tunnels of visibility. His breath fogged the glass, though the interior was cool. The memory of the letter still burned in his jacket pocket. He hadn't reread it. He didn't need to. Beside him, the digital radio crackled with static. He reached out instinctively to silence it, not wanting distractions. Rex barked again, 3 sharp bursts this time, as if in protest. Daniel glanced back briefly, meeting his dog's eyes in the rearview mirror. They were wide, fixed, alert. Rex wasn't barking at noise, he was barking at what wasn't there, at the silence that had replaced a sense of safety. The memory hit him like a punch to the chest. He was 12, sitting on the worn carpet in their old apartment, his knees scraped from a schoolyard fall. Margaret, her hair still dark then, her hands dusted in flour from the pie crust she'd been rolling, crouched down beside him. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't scold him for fighting. She simply looked him in the eye and said, "Justice matters, even when it costs you, but never forget who you're fighting for." That had stayed with him. It was why he joined the force. Not to make arrests, not for the badge, but because he believed in protecting the people who couldn't fight back. People like his mother. He shifted in his seat as the rain grew heavier. The trees outside blurred into jagged shadows, the roadside slick and uninviting. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, a message from Officer Mike. "Still at the station. Need backup?" Daniel ignored it. There was no time to explain. Rex growled again. This time, he lunged forward, front paws pressing against the center console, his claws scraping lightly. His body was rigid, tail low, a posture Daniel knew too well. Warning, not panic. Rex was reading something Daniel couldn't air pressure, scent, perhaps even dread. As the cruiser turned off the highway onto Havenwood Drive, a narrow residential stretch that wound its way up toward the hills, Daniel felt his stomach twist. Every house on the street sat in silence, lights off, windows drawn. It was late, true, but this was something more. The silence was too absolute. The world had pulled a blanket over its head and was holding its breath. Ahead, the familiar outline of Margaret's white clapboard house emerged through the downpour. The porch light was off. The curtains in the living room were closed. That alone would have been enough to make Daniel uneasy. His mother never left her porch light off, not when she knew he might call or drop by. She said it was the lighthouse in her little sea. He slowed the car as they approached the driveway. Rex let out a low, mournful sound, almost a whine, but with urgency laced beneath it. His body shifted again, pacing back and forth. Daniel pulled into the drive and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt unnatural. He reached for the flashlight tucked beneath the seat, then hesitated, instead unclipping his holstered weapon. Not because he expected a fight, but because instinct told him the storm outside was not the only threat tonight. Rex jumped out the moment the door opened, landing with a splash in the puddles that littered the walkway. Rain fell hard on Daniel's head and back, soaking his shirt in seconds. The gravel crunched underfoot as he followed Rex, flashlight in one hand, firearm in the other. They stopped at the porch. Rex sniffed the doorframe, tail low, hackles raised. Daniel tried the doorknob. Locked. That in itself was odd. His mother rarely locked the door before 10. She always said it made her feel like she was locking the world out, and she hated the thought of someone needing help and being turned away. Daniel moved along the edge of the porch, peering through the windows. The house was dark. No movement, no TV light, no familiar silhouette in the kitchen. Rex moved to the side, sniffing, circling back toward the fence. As Daniel rounded the back corner of the house, flashlight cutting through the downpour, another memory surged to the surface, an afternoon long ago, when he'd come home from school with a bruised eye and told his mother he didn't want to go back. She'd held his face and said, "Son, life doesn't let you run. You face it, one storm at a time." He took a breath and opened the side gate, following Rex toward the backyard. A motion light clicked on, sudden and blinding in the rain. Rex froze. Then he barked, loud, frantic, insistent. He ran up to the back door and began pawing at it. Daniel's heart jumped. He ran, slipped slightly on the slick stones, caught himself, and sprinted the final few feet. The door was ajar. He grabbed the knob and pushed. It creaked open with effort, the hinges resisting like they hadn't been used in years. The house inside was colder than it should have been. The scent hit him instantly damp wood, something metallic, and the unmistakable trace of fear. Rex entered first, nose low to the ground. Daniel followed, heart pounding against his ribs. They were inside, and the storm had just begun. The air inside the house was cold and stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic. Daniel stepped in slowly, his weapon drawn low, flashlight cutting through the murky shadows. Behind him, Rex moved with tense precision, shoulders low, ears twitching at every creak and whisper in the house's bones. The rain outside still hammered against the rooftop, but in here, the silence felt heavier than the storm. The living room, once warm with Margaret's knickknacks and floral throws, was in disarray. One of the armchairs lay on its side, its cushions half spilled. The floral curtains that had always gently swayed in the breeze now hung in tatters, one side ripped down completely. Daniel's flashlight passed over the coffee table where a ceramic teacup lay shattered, the tea long dried into a dark stain on the wood. No sign of forced entry, but something violent had happened here. Rex let out a low whine and sniffed the rug where one of Margaret's slippers had been left behind, tilted slightly, as though it had been kicked off in a hurry. Daniel's throat tightened. "Mom?" he called, his voice barely more than a whisper, but it echoed through the empty house like a shot. No response. Rex suddenly perked up, nose lifted, tail straight out. He sniffed rapidly, turning once in a circle before darting toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. Daniel followed, boots making soft thuds on the hardwood. The kitchen was cold, the back door ajar. A puddle of muddy footprints spread across the tile. One large set, heavy, male. Daniel crouched, examined the tracks. No effort to clean or hide them. Whoever had come in was confident or in a hurry. Then Rex froze near the pantry door, nose pressed to the baseboard. He scratched at it twice, then let out a low, short bark. Daniel looked closer and noticed a faint smear of red, dried blood on the bottom of the cabinet. Not enough to suggest a fatal wound, but enough to say someone had been hurt. Before he could react further, a rustling sound echoed from the backyard, just barely audible above the storm. Daniel stiffened, then glanced toward the window. Across the fence, behind the hedge, a curtain fluttered inside the neighboring house. It was the home of Mr. Harris. Walter Harris, 76, was a retired postal worker with a thin frame and back slightly hunched from years of carrying sacks. His white hair was combed neatly, even when he didn't plan on leaving the house, and he always wore suspenders over his shirt, no matter the temperature. A solitary man, since his wife passed away a decade ago, Harris kept to himself but was fiercely observant. He could tell the time by the sound of the garbage truck and often noted who came and went as a hobby more than suspicion. Daniel crossed the kitchen quickly and stepped out onto the porch, flashlight in hand. He waved it once toward the window across the yard. The curtain twitched. A moment later, a hesitant hand parted it, and Harris peeked out. His expression wrinkled with guilt and fear tightened when he recognized Daniel. The porch light flicked on. Daniel raised his voice slightly. "Mr. Harris, did you see anything tonight?" The older man opened the window slightly. His voice was gravelly, like the crunch of dry leaves. I heard some shouting earlier, maybe a half hour ago. Thought it was the television at first. Then I saw someone go into your mom's house. Big fella, didn't look right. I should have called someone, but I didn't know." "It's all right," Daniel interrupted gently. "Did you see where he went after?" Mr. Harris hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sorry, I closed the curtain. Figured it was none of my business." Daniel nodded, biting down the frustration that threatened to rise. "Stay inside and lock your doors. If you remember anything else, call the precinct." He turned back into the house, the weight of dread sinking deeper. Rex was at the base of the hallway now, nose fixed to a spot near the closet door beneath the staircase. The dog let out another bark, short and urgent, then scratched at the door. Daniel approached slowly, heart pounding harder than before. He reached for the knob, turned it quietly, and pulled it open. The faint smell of earth and old wood wafted out. A steep, narrow staircase led downward into darkness. Daniel flicked the safety off his gun. "Let's go," he murmured. Rex descended first, careful but quick, his paws barely making a sound. Daniel followed, flashlight beam flickering over the warped wood walls. The basement was unfinished. Margaret always said it made her feel like the house was sitting on something unsettled. Shelves lined one side with old boxes of photos and worn holiday decorations. A washing machine sat unplugged in the corner. Everything appeared undisturbed. Until Rex turned sharply to the far end of the room, toward the old storage crawlspace. He let out a soft, deep growl. Daniel's flashlight caught a faint glint of something reflective metal? No. Plastic. Tape. He stepped closer. The storage door was slightly ajar, and on the concrete floor lay a strip of duct tape, crumpled and sticky. Daniel's breath caught. He placed his hand on the door and eased it open slowly, silently, and his heart stopped. The crawl space beyond was dim, lit only by his flashlight beam. It was cramped, barely enough room to crouch, and in the far corner, barely visible under an old moving blanket, was a figure bound, unmoving. Rex barked, lunging forward but stopping short, as if afraid to startle whoever was inside. Daniel dropped to his knees, set the flashlight down, and reached out. He pulled the blanket back and found her. His mother. Margaret Carter, frail and trembling, was bound at the wrists and ankles, duct tape stretched tight over her mouth. Her silver-white hair clung to her forehead in damp wisps, and her eyes were wide with fear, but they blinked alive. Daniel exhaled a broken gasp. "Mom!" He reached for his pocket knife and carefully sliced the tape from her wrists. Her fingers fluttered like dying leaves as she reached for his face. He ripped the tape from her mouth gently, and she inhaled sharply, her chest heaving. "Daniel," she choked, her voice hoarse. They were going to take me." He swallowed hard, pulling her into his arms, wrapping her against his chest. Her body felt weightless, as if she'd been drained of everything except fear. Rex stood close, tail low, eyes fixed on the dark corners as if daring danger to show its face again. The house above was silent once more, but Daniel knew the quiet wasn't peace. It was only the eye of the storm. Daniel cradled his mother in the cold, narrow crawlspace beneath the house, arms wrapped around her trembling frame as if he could shield her from everything she had just endured. Margaret's breath came in short gasps, every inhale a struggle, every exhale a fragile plea for safety. Her silver hair was matted with sweat and dust, her once pink cardigan now dull and stained. The faint smell of duct tape and fear still hung in the air like rot. He wiped the corner of her mouth where the tape had left a red mark, his thumb shaking as it moved. "I've got you, Mom," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. "You're safe now." But the word safe barely felt real. Rex remained alert, standing rigid near the entrance to the crawlspace, his body forming a protective barrier between them and the dark stairwell beyond. The German shepherd's teeth were slightly bared, not from aggression, but as a warning. His low growl resonated in the small space like a drumbeat. The hairs along his back were raised. He hadn't relaxed even after Margaret had been unbound. His ears tilted back and forth, reading the air, sensing more than Daniel could see. Daniel rose slowly, careful not to leave his mother unsupported. She was weak, barely able to lift her arms, but her eyes, those soft, cloudy gray eyes, held on to him like a lifeline. They knew you'd come," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. "They didn't expect Rex." Daniel glanced at his partner. "Neither did they expect he'd still have a fight in him," he said, voice low. Then Margaret gripped his wrist weakly, surprising him with a jolt of sudden strength. "Don't let them win, Daniel," she said through clenched teeth. "Don't let them scare you off the case. That's what they want." He nodded, even though his mind was racing. Whoever had done this hadn't come to rob or vandalize. They had come with a purpose to break him, to warn him off, but they had miscalculated. They had underestimated Rex, and they had forgotten that Daniel Carter didn't scare easily. A sound from above. The unmistakable creak of floorboards cut through the silence like a blade. Rex's growl deepened instantly. The dog turned sharply, positioning himself between the doorway and Margaret again. His stance was aggressive, head lowered, tail stiff, eyes locked on the top of the stairs. Daniel clicked his flashlight off and drew his gun, stepping silently toward the crawlspace entrance. He peeked out into the basement. The space beyond was dim, shadows dancing along the concrete walls from the faint motion sensor light that had flickered to life earlier. Another creak. Closer now. Someone was upstairs. Daniel whispered, "Stay here," to his mother, though he hated the thought of leaving her again. But Margaret, ever braver than she looked, gave him a nod. She pulled the discarded blanket tighter around herself and leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on Rex as if trusting the dog more than the wood and stone surrounding her. Rex looked up at Daniel. There was a silent understanding between them, the same one forged years ago during their first case together. One bark would mean danger. 2 barks would mean to retreat. But now, Rex gave no sound, only focus. Daniel ascended the basement steps slowly, pressing his foot against each stair with practiced silence. He reached the kitchen, now more ominous than chaotic. The door was still ajar, rain dripping in a slow rhythm onto the floor. The fridge hummed, oblivious to the tension in the air. Then movement. A shadow shifted past the hallway entrance. Daniel moved swiftly, pressing his back against the kitchen wall, gun raised. He tilted his head just enough to glimpse into the hallway mirror hanging above the shoe bench. A reflection. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving slowly, confidently, as if checking the rooms one by one. He didn't recognize him, but the man was armed. He carried something long and metal, not a gun, but a crowbar or pipe. His clothes were dark, soaked from the rain. Daniel's pulse quickened. As the figure approached the living room, Daniel stepped out. "Police!" he barked. "Drop it!" The intruder turned sharply, eyes widening as he raised the pipe. But Rex exploded up the basement stairs with a roar. Before the man could swing, the dog launched himself forward, hitting the assailant center mass. The two crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. The metal pipe clattered across the floor. Daniel rushed forward, gun still trained. "Do not move!" Rex stood over the man, teeth bared, growling inches from the attacker's face. The man groaned. I'm not the only one," he spat, his lip already split from the impact. "You think this ends with me?" Daniel moved in, kneeling to cuff the intruder. "If you think I'm afraid, you picked the wrong house," he muttered. As he tightened the cuffs, the man hissed, "You're too late. The message is already sent." Daniel froze for a heartbeat, then shook his head. "Maybe, but so is mine." He hauled the man to his feet. Blood ran from the corner of the man's mouth, dripping onto his soaked jacket. He had a buzz cut, a crooked nose that had likely been broken more than once, and a scar over his left brow that pulsed red. Not a hired burglar, a thug with history. Maybe cartel, maybe freelance. But he hadn't expected Rex. They moved toward the front of the house, Rex staying close on the attacker's flank. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Red and blue lights appeared in the distance, the silent approach of backup. Daniel had hit the emergency ping on his radio earlier before he even reached the neighborhood. From the basement stairwell, Margaret called out faintly, "Daniel?" He turned back, voice firm. But gentle. "We got him, Mom. We got him." The flashing lights from the arriving patrol cars painted the wet street in red and blue pulses, casting dancing shadows across the front porch and dripping window panes. Officer Mike Rivera, a young, broad-shouldered man in his early 30s with short black hair and a square jaw, stepped out of the lead cruiser. His dark uniform clung to him from the drizzle, and his breath fogged the air as he jogged toward the house. Calm and methodical, Mike had always been the quiet presence on shift, the one who didn't speak unless it mattered. He respected Daniel like an older brother and often mirrored his serious, methodical approach to work. Inside, Daniel was crouched beside the intruder now, zip-tied to one of Margaret's wooden kitchen chairs. The man's wrists were marked red from the struggle, and his eyes, small, set beneath heavy brows, flicked between Daniel and Rex, who stood less than 2 feet away, unmoving, watching. The man had offered no name. Only the hissed warning before. "You're too late." Mike entered quietly, gun holstered, and offered a quick nod. "You okay?" he asked. His eyes passed briefly over the chaos Margaret, now seated with a blanket on the couch, her expression blank from exhaustion, the living room still in a state of disarray. Daniel stood and motioned toward the restrained man. "Caught him inside. Basement trap. Came back to clean up or finish what someone else started." Mike glanced at Rex and offered him a subtle nod. He'd worked around the German Shepherd before and knew better than to try a pat. "You think he's alone?" "No," Daniel replied, "but he's sloppy. Scared. That means he knows something." Daniel turned to the intruder. The man wore a black, tactical jacket generic. No insignia, with mud-caked boots and a small stitched tear along his sleeve. His build was strong but starting to wear, suggesting someone who had been in the game too long, possibly ex-military or private contractor. "What's your name?" Daniel asked calmly. The man stared blankly. Daniel knelt again, lowering his voice. "You're not talking to a rookie. You came into my mother's house. You left her tied in a crawl space. That's not just intimidation, that's personal. So here's your only chance to explain who gave the order." The man's jaw clenched. Then, slowly, he spoke. "You've been on something you weren't supposed to touch. The names you've been tracking, the crates in the warehouse, they belong to people higher than you can imagine." "I'll imagine it just fine," Daniel replied. "Try me." The man's lips curled into something between a grin and a grimace. "She was just leverage, that's all. Scare you off, slow you down. But it's too late now. You've already drawn too much attention." Rex suddenly barked once, sharply. He moved to the man's side and began sniffing aggressively along the jacket. Daniel and Mike both stepped closer. Then, Rex's teeth caught the edge of the inner lining just enough to tug. Mike raised an eyebrow. "He's got something?" Daniel reached in. His fingers brushed against a hidden pocket sewn beneath the jacket lining. He yanked it open and retrieved a thin black smartphone older model, screen cracked but functional. It had been taped inside, clearly not meant to be found unless things went sideways. Daniel handed it to Mike. "Get it to tech. See what you can extract." Mike nodded, already dialing a secure line. Rex sat back on his haunches, satisfied, tongue briefly hanging out, chest rising and falling steadily. Daniel glanced at his mother, who hadn't spoken since the rescue. She was seated in her old armchair now, wrapped in a knit blanket, fingers intertwined tightly. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes locked onto Daniel's. They carried questions, fear, and something harder, resolve. Daniel returned to the suspect. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer, keeping his tone cold. "Was it someone inside?" The man's left eye twitched. "You're wasting time. You'll find out soon enough. Everyone's connected." That phrase echoed in Daniel's chest like a hammer. He'd suspected corruption in the upper ranks for months now. Files that vanished, suspects released without explanation, surveillance getting accidentally wiped. But it was the next moment that confirmed it. Mike, who had stepped outside to take the tech call, returned and leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The phone. It's got encrypted messages. Not commercial stuff, military grade. And get this, the sender ID is masked, but one message has a partial contact label. Chief R." Daniel's blood ran cold. There was only one man in their department with a title that began with Chief R. Deputy Chief Roland Marks, a man in his late 50s, sharp-dressed, soft-voiced, and politically connected. With his silver hair and neatly trimmed beard, Marks was the face of professionalism often interviewed by the press, lauded for his crime reduction statistics, and considered a future police commissioner. But beneath that charm was a figure that Daniel had always found too smooth, too calculating. Daniel's mind raced. If Marks was involved, the danger went far beyond one thug with a pipe and a warning note. It meant the case Daniel had been investigating had cut into a nerve someone very high up wanted deadened permanently. He turned back to the restrained man. "Your boss just got sloppy," he said, "and we're going to burn this whole rotten network down." The man didn't smile this time. Rain continued to drizzle in a whispering curtain across the windshield as Daniel sat behind the wheel, eyes flicking between the road ahead and the side mirror. The cruiser's interior was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the dashboard, casting blue shadows on Margaret's pale face. She lay wrapped in a thick blanket in the back seat, her breath slow but steady, her head resting against the window. Beside her sat Rex, the German shepherd silent now but watchful, his ears twitching with every sound beyond the glass. Officer Mike Rivera had already pulled away with the handcuffed intruder in the back of his own unit, headed for the downtown precinct. Mike had promised to initiate the data extraction from the phone immediately and report back as soon as they had something solid. It had been less than 15 minutes since the capture, and Daniel was still processing the man's parting words. "You're too late." His instincts churned uneasily. The rain had softened to a light mist, though clouds still hung thick above the hills as Daniel steered the vehicle toward the regional hospital. Margaret hadn't spoken since she was rescued. She was dehydrated, weak, and clearly in shock, though the quiet strength in her gaze never fully faded. Daniel couldn't help but glance into the rearview mirror every few seconds, checking on her like he used to when he was 8 and convinced she'd disappear if he looked away. At the first red light, Daniel finally allowed himself to breathe. He tapped the wheel, exhaling a slow sigh. "Almost there, Mom," he said softly. That's when Rex stirred. The dog, until now quietly pressed beside Margaret, suddenly stood, his nose twitching furiously. He turned sharply toward the floorboard beneath Daniel's seat, letting out a low, guttural growl. Daniel's attention snapped to him instantly. "What is it?" he asked, but Rex's behavior answered before words could. Rex pawed at the floor, then growled again, this time louder, more insistent. His body stiffened, tail pointing rigid, as he nudged at the seam where the front floor met the undercarriage panel. Daniel felt a cold prick at the back of his neck. Without thinking, he pulled the vehicle into an empty gas station lot just off the main road and shifted into park. "Stay here," he said sharply, eyes flicking between his mother and Rex. He grabbed the flashlight from the side compartment and stepped into the rain. The night had gone still again. No passing cars, just the hiss of water sliding off rooftops and gutters. Daniel crouched beside the cruiser, flashlight sweeping under the frame. Then he saw it. A rectangular black box about the size of a paperback, duct-taped to the bottom of the chassis nestled just above the rear axle. A red diode blinked slowly on its side. A wire, snipped clean, dangled loosely. Daniel's blood turned to ice. It was a bomb. A timed device. And someone, whoever had planted it, had forgotten to arm the countdown. Rex. That dog had just saved all of them again. Daniel stood quickly, heart pounding hard in his throat. He looked through the rear window. Margaret was still resting, unaware. Rex sat poised beside her, eyes locked on the side of the vehicle, tail now thumping softly alert, but calm. Daniel grabbed his phone and snapped several photos of the device. He backed away and called dispatch. "Control, this is Detective Carter. I've got a device under my vehicle. Looks like a timer-based explosive. We're safe. It hasn't been activated. I need a bomb squad at the Sinclair station off Route 9 immediately. My mother's in the vehicle. Uninjured, but shaken. I'm requesting backup and medical assistance." The dispatcher responded with a calm urgency, confirming units were en route. Daniel returned to the cruiser and gently opened the back door. "Mom," he said softly, crouching down so she could see his face. "We're going to get out and sit inside the station store for a bit, okay?" Margaret blinked, dazed, but nodded. He helped her out, keeping the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The store was closed for the night, but a covered bench sat under the awning, dry enough. Daniel helped her down and sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her back. Rex sat at her feet like a guardian carved in stone. Minutes later, the blue and white flashing lights of the bomb squad truck pulled in. 2 techs stepped out, already in partial gear. One of them, Lana Bryce, a woman in her early 40s with a sharp jawline, cropped sandy hair, and a calm intensity approached Daniel. Lana was known in the department as one of the most meticulous EOD specialists in the state. She had served 2 tours in Iraq before joining the force and had a dry sense of humor that often surfaced in the tensest situations. Daniel briefed her quickly, showing the pictures and pointing to the underside of the cruiser. "It wasn't armed," he said, "but it was ready." Lana crouched beside the car, her partner standing by. After a moment of close inspection, she stood and removed her helmet. "You're lucky," she said, voice low. "This is military grade. Whoever made it knew what they were doing. But this trigger system, it's old school. Manual switch. He either panicked or forgot." Daniel nodded grimly. "He was interrupted. We caught him inside the house. My guess is he was supposed to arm it once we started driving again. He never got the chance." Lana whistled softly. He wouldn't have needed more than 30 seconds. Daniel looked down at Rex, who sat now beside Margaret, gently resting his chin on her shoe. He didn't get it, Daniel said quietly, because Rex wouldn't let him. The first light of dawn broke across the Colorado skyline, casting long golden shafts through the thin mist still clinging to the ground. The air held a chilled stillness, less the calm after the storm than the moment just before accountability arrives. Daniel stood beside the ambulance watching as the paramedics eased his mother into the back of the vehicle. Her frail form seemed even smaller under the hospital blanket, yet her fingers still gripped his hand tightly before the doors gently closed. He offered her a nod, steady, reassuring. She blinked once, slowly, and gave the faintest smile. Beside him, Rex sat upright, his fur damp from the long night, but his posture unwavering. The German shepherd's eyes followed the ambulance door as it shut with a soft click. Then, and only then, did he release a quiet breath through his nose, a canine exhale of relief. He remained still until the ambulance pulled away into the morning traffic, his gaze trailing after it until it vanished around the corner. Inside the hospital, Margaret was being entrusted to someone Daniel knew he could count on. Caitlin Dwyer, his maternal cousin, a registered nurse in her early 30s with bright auburn hair, always tied in a no-nonsense bun. Caitlin had inherited their grandmother's fierce disposition and gentle bedside manner. Petite in stature but sharp in spirit, she moved with clinical precision and carried the warmth of someone who had watched too many lives slip away to take anything for granted. She took Margaret's hand and, with one look toward Daniel, gave a firm nod that meant, "I've got this." With his mother now safe and under supervision, Daniel stepped away from the curb and returned to the command vehicle where Mike Rivera was waiting. The younger officer's eyes were red with fatigue, but his jaw was set. "She's stable?" Mike asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Caitlin will stay with her." Mike handed him a tablet. "Feds are online. They've got everything they need to move." Daniel tapped through the digital evidence. The decrypted messages from the seized phone were damning. Precise routes, manifest codes, times, and most important voice notes recorded during encrypted calls. Among them, one voice was unmistakable. Deputy Chief Roland Marks, calm as ever, discussing border movement schedules and eliminating interference. An FBI liaison, Special Agent Leon Mercer, a seasoned black agent in his early 50s with a shaved head, thick-rimmed glasses, and a deep baritone voice, had been looped in via video just an hour earlier. Mercer was known within federal circles as a ghost hunter. He specialized in rooting out high-level corruption and had taken down more than one polished figure wearing a badge. Pragmatic, meticulous, and unflinchingly composed, he had reviewed the intel in real time and moved fast. Now, just as the sun cracked through the clouds, Agent Mercer's voice came through the command vehicle's speaker. "Operation Iron Gate is a go. We've got DHS agents positioned along the county border. The convoy is en route now. We'll take them before they cross the state line." Mike looked up. "Convoy?" Daniel nodded. "They're moving weapons in 2 trucks, using farm supply trailers as cover. One of the audio files gave us the departure time and route. It's happening this morning." "And Marks?" "Already under surveillance," Daniel said. "Mercer wants him caught live, not tipped off." They exchanged a brief glance. The weight of it wasn't lost on either of them. It's one thing to arrest a career criminal. It's another to bring down a decorated officer. An hour later, in a narrow stretch of canyon road just 3 miles from the state border, law enforcement moved in. Surveillance drones hovered silently overhead. FBI SUVs blocked the highway while tactical units flanked both ends of the winding pass. Daniel stood at a mobile ops unit stationed on a hilltop, binoculars in hand. From above, he watched the 2 large trucks crawl through the mist, innocuous if not for the dark sedans trailing them like shadows. The takedown was fast and clean. As soon as the convoy entered the narrowest point of the pass, spike strips were deployed. The trucks screeched to a halt. Armed agents moved in from the trees shouting orders. 2 men inside the lead truck surrendered without resistance, but the third bald, muscular eyes Wilde tried to flee on foot. He didn't get far. Daniel watched from the hill, heart pounding as the last of the men were restrained. Radios confirmed it. The entire convoy had been seized, the weapons confiscated, and the drivers were already naming names. The final arrest of the day took place back in Denver. Deputy Chief Roland Marks had arrived early to the station, as usual, wearing his pressed gray suit and polished leather shoes. When two FBI agents entered his office and quietly presented their warrant, he barely blinked. He stood, nodded once, and buttoned his jacket. As he was escorted out past the lobby, he noticed Daniel waiting silently by the elevator. Their eyes met. Marks didn't speak. Daniel didn't look away. By mid-morning, headlines began to roll. Deputy Chief arrested in federal sting operation. Illegal weapons ring busted on Colorado border. Hero dog averts bombing, saves officer's family. But none of it mattered as much as the moment Daniel pulled up once more to his mother's hospital room. She was awake, sipping water from a straw. Her expression softened when she saw him, and beside her bed, curled up on the mat Caitlin had sneakily laid by the chair, was Rex, finally asleep. Before Daniel could enter, he felt a tap on his arm. Turning, he found Walter Harris, the elderly neighbor with white wispy hair and a wrinkled flannel shirt, standing nervously by the hallway wall. He looked older than before, as though the guilt had aged him overnight. I came to say I'm sorry," Harris said quietly. "I saw the man go into your house. I should have called someone. I was afraid. That was your mother. I should have done more." Daniel looked at him for a moment, then shook his head. "You told me the truth when it mattered." From inside the room, Margaret's voice called, "Walter?" He peeked past Daniel and she smiled. "You're forgiven," she said, her voice weak but warm. "Now go home and get some rest. You look worse than I do." The old man chuckled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. "Yes, ma'am." As Harris shuffled away, Daniel stepped inside, sat by his mother, and reached down to scratch Rex behind the ear. The sun had fully risen now, bright and clear, shining through the windows and into the room. Justice had arrived. Morning sunlight streamed gently through the windows of Margaret Carter's small white house, illuminating dust motes that danced like quiet memories in the warm air. Outside, the trees stood still, their leaves washed clean from the storms of the night before. The porch swing creaked softly in the breeze, as if the house itself were finally exhaling. Inside, Daniel sat in the old armchair beside the living room window. His uniform jacket was folded neatly on the back of the couch, and for once, his badge and sidearm were out of sight. He wore a plain blue shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands relaxed but marked by exhaustion. Across from him on the worn floral couch, Margaret reclined with her legs covered by the same knit blanket she had wrapped herself in after her rescue. Her breathing was steady now, her eyes clear though ringed by fatigue. She reached out with a trembling hand and placed it gently on Rex's head. The German shepherd lay curled beside her feet on the rug, his sable and silver coat slightly fluffed from sleep. One ear twitched occasionally, but his eyes remained closed, half in rest, half in readiness. Even now, in the quiet after all the chaos, he kept one paw on the world. Margaret stroked him slowly, fingers moving through the fur behind his bent left ear. "If it weren't for him—" Her voice caught, unable to finish. She blinked, swallowed. "Daniel, I didn't think I'd see you again." Daniel leaned forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to say it." His voice was thick, uneven. He looked at Rex, then back at his mother. "He's family. Always has been. I just never said it out loud before." Margaret smiled softly. "Now you have." The fire crackled lightly in the hearth, sending gentle warmth into the room. The scent of cedar and old books filled the air, comforting in its familiarity. Framed photographs lined the mantel. Daniel's graduation from the academy, a younger Margaret holding him as a child, and one new addition, a small, freshly printed photo of Rex seated beside Daniel in uniform, both looking directly into the camera with the same quiet intensity. The front door opened with a slow creak, and the sound of boots on hardwood announced a visitor. "Permission to enter the sanctuary?" called Mike Rivera, grinning as he held up a paper bag and a cardboard drink tray. His black hair was damp from the morning dew, his dark green jacket unzipped. In one hand, he carried a box of cinnamon scones, in the other two, steaming cups of black coffee. Daniel chuckled. "Permission granted, as long as that smells like breakfast." "It is, barely," Mike said, setting the items down on the coffee table. "Scones and caffeine. We deserve better, but I wasn't about to try my hand at your mom's French toast." Margaret laughed gently. "Smart man." Mike walked over to Rex and crouched, scratching behind the dog's ears. "There he is, the hero of the hour." Rex opened one eye briefly, acknowledged the gesture, then settled his head back down with a huff. "I'm not kidding," Mike said, glancing at Daniel. "That bomb under your cruiser? If Rex hadn't caught that scent, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. That dog didn't just save your mother, he saved this case." Daniel nodded, somber. "He always knows. I don't know how, but he does." Mike took a sip of coffee and settled into the chair opposite them. "You know, the guys at the precinct, some of them have already started calling him Sergeant Rex." Daniel smirked. He'd outrank half of them. Margaret leaned forward slightly. "So, it's really over?" Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Marks is in federal custody. Every name in that network's been logged, tracked, and locked down. The trucks were seized, weapons secured, and most importantly, you're safe." He turned to Daniel. "You did it." Daniel exhaled slowly, but his expression didn't relax entirely. "We did it. All of us." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that comes after a long battle, not empty, but full of what was lost, what was saved, and what might now grow in its place. Later, as Mike left to return to the precinct, Daniel stepped out onto the front porch to watch the sun climb higher in the sky. The town below was just beginning to stir, kids waiting for school buses, joggers passing with earbuds in, the clatter of a garbage truck rounding the corner. Behind him, Margaret dozed lightly, a book resting on her chest. Rex had moved to the hearth, curling beside it. His chest rose and fell slowly, ears still faintly perked as if guarding dreams. Daniel walked over, knelt beside him, and rubbed the patch of fur behind his scarred hind leg. "You've earned a rest, partner," he whispered. Rex didn't open his eyes, but his tail gave one soft thump against the floor. Outside, the storm had passed. And inside, in a small home with creaky floors and warm light, the kind of peace they had all been chasing had finally taken root. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not loud or grand, they arrive on four legs, with quiet eyes and a heart full of loyalty. Rex didn't speak, but his actions were a sermon, a lesson in unconditional love, courage in the face of darkness, and faith that never gives up. This story reminds us that even in our darkest storms, God may send help in unexpected forms. A loyal dog, a kind neighbor, a moment of clarity. It's a gentle whisper from above that says, "You are not alone." Through Rex, a family was reunited, evil was brought to justice, and a town was reminded that hope still walks among us. In our daily lives, we often overlook these small signs of grace, but maybe, just maybe, the miracles we pray for are already beside us. Watching, waiting, protecting. If this story touched your heart, type Amen in the comments to thank God for the unseen blessings in your life. May the Lord bless and protect all who are watching. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Tell us, have you ever seen a miracle in your life? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and love. And remember, even one loyal heart can change everything.